Just a player, sitting in front of reporters after a difficult loss, saying something honest that he probably knew would travel far beyond the room where he said it. Will Smith did not intend to detonate anything. That much is clear from the way it happened, the casual, almost offhand quality of the delivery, the absence of drama in his voice when he said the words that immediately became the only thing the U.S. baseball media wanted to talk about. He was answering a question. A direct question about Roki Sasaki's performance, about what had happened on the mound during the innings that contributed to the loss, about whether there were signs that something was wrong before the results made it undeniable. He answered honestly. The way catchers answer when they have been carrying something through an entire game and the game is over and the weight of carrying it alone is no longer necessary. He said Sasaki had been tipping his pitches. And then he said the 5 words that turned a post-game press conference comment into a story that ran across every baseball media platform in the country within hours. Shohei noticed it before I did. 5 words. Simple. Factual. Delivered without emphasis or drama or any apparent awareness that what he had just said would reframe the entire conversation about the loss, about Sasaki's performance, about Ohtani's role within the Dodgers' pitching operation, and about the internal dynamics of a team that the baseball world had been watching closely for signs of the fault lines that significant rosters always develop under the pressure of a long season. The U.S. media stirred. Then it erupted. This is the full story of what Will Smith said, what it means, and what it reveals about something that had been happening inside the Dodgers organization that nobody outside it fully understood until a catcher told the truth after a loss. Because the casual baseball fan hears the phrase and understands it as something negative, a pitcher giving away information that hitters can use against him. But the full weight of what pitch tipping represents in the specific context of a major league game, and why the revelation that it was happening to Sasaki matters as much as it does, requires a deeper examination. Every major league hitter is looking for information. This is the fundamental reality of the at-bat, the contest between a pitcher trying to disguise his intentions and a hitter trying to identify them. The pitcher's job is to make every pitch look identical until it isn't. The same grip hidden inside the glove. The same arm path regardless of what is coming. The same release point whether the pitch is a fastball or a splitter or a slider. The architecture of deception is what separates elite pitching from merely good pitching. Pitch tipping breaks that architecture. It introduces a tell, a physical habit, a mechanical pattern, a subtle variation in grip or stance or arm angle that communicates, to a hitter paying close enough attention, what is coming before it arrives. Sometimes the tell is in the glove. Sometimes it is in the set position. Sometimes it is in something so small, a finger placement, a shoulder rotation, a breath, that it takes hours of film study to identify. But once identified, it is devastating. Because a hitter who knows what pitch is coming does not need to guess. He does not need to react. He can simply wait for the pitch he has identified and attack it with the full force of his preparation. The advantage shifts completely. The pitcher who believes he is executing a carefully designed sequence is actually executing a sequence the hitter already knows. Sasaki had a tell. This is what Smith confirmed. The truth that the loss had made impossible to continue containing, the information that had been present during the game and had contributed to the outcomes in the innings that mattered most. And the first person to see it was not the catcher whose professional responsibility is to manage the pitcher's arsenal and protect him from exactly this kind of vulnerability. It was Ohtani. Because Smith's admission, Shohei noticed it before I did, is not simply a comment about who was more observant on a specific afternoon. It is a window into something that had been happening inside the Dodgers-Battery relationship for longer than the loss made visible. Ohtani had been watching Sasaki pitch. Not casually, not in the way that every player on a roster pays general attention to what is happening on the field. With the specific, technical, deeply informed attention of a pitcher watching another pitcher. Of someone who understands, from direct personal experience, every mechanical detail of what an elite starting pitcher is doing when he is executing properly, and what deviations from that execution look like when they appear. The tell that Smith eventually identified, that the opposing hitter's body language suggested they had identified, Ohtani had seen first. Not from the catcher's position, which offers the most direct sightline to a pitcher's mechanics and the most immediate access to the information that tipping produces. From the dugout. From a distance. Through the general visual field of a player watching a game rather than the specific technical focus of a catcher calling pitches. He saw it anyway. This is the detail that the U.S. media locked onto immediately. Because it says something about Ohtani that transcends the specific situation of Sasaki's tipping tell. It says something about the quality of his baseball intelligence, the depth and precision of his understanding of the game's mechanics, that he could identify a tell from the dugout before the catcher identified it from behind the plate. Smith did not frame this as embarrassing to himself. He framed it as remarkable about Ohtani. The distinction matters. Because a lesser competitor, in Smith's position, might have allowed the story to be told differently, might have framed the timeline in a way that protected his own professional standing as a catcher whose primary responsibility includes exactly this kind of identification. Smith told the truth. He said Ohtani noticed it first. And in doing so, he communicated something about both men that the baseball world found impossible to look away from. This is the thing about a story that touches multiple significant threads simultaneously. It generates not one conversation but several, running parallel to each other with enough overlap that the total volume of the response becomes something larger than any individual thread would produce alone. The first conversation was about Sasaki. About the specific nature of his tell and what it means for his development as a major league pitcher and whether the loss was a symptom of a mechanical issue that has been building or a situational vulnerability that the Dodgers pitching staff can identify and correct before it becomes a pattern that opposing scouting departments encode into their game plans. The second conversation was about Smith. About what his admission reveals regarding the internal communication structure within the Dodgers battery, the relationship between catcher and pitcher, the protocols that exist for identifying and addressing tipping in real time, and whether the fact that Ohtani saw it first reflects a gap in the battery's self-monitoring that Roberts and the coaching staff need to address. The third conversation, the one that traveled furthest and generated the most sustained engagement, was about Ohtani. Because what Smith had described was not simply a player being observant. What Smith had described was a player functioning, within the structure of his own team, at a level of baseball intelligence that exceeded the specialized expertise of the professional whose specific job requires exactly the kind of perception that Ohtani had demonstrated from a greater distance. The baseball media processed this with the fascination that Ohtani's capabilities always generate, the specific fascination of watching someone operate in territory that the existing frameworks of the sport were not built to accommodate. The pitching staff's response was the most immediate. Because the tell that Smith confirmed existed, the mechanical pattern that had been visible enough for Ohtani to identify from the dugout, needed to be addressed before Sasaki's next start. Before opposing scouting departments, now alerted by the public confirmation of Smith's comments, could encode the specific tell into their hitter preparation with the deliberate focus of a professional organization that had just been handed information about a vulnerability that it could exploit. The pitching coaches went to work. Film sessions were extended. Mechanical reviews were conducted with the specific focus that identified tells demand, the frame-by-frame examination of grip and stance and arm path and release that isolates the moment where the tell appears and builds the corrective adjustment that eliminates it. Sasaki participated in this process with the openness of a pitcher who understood that the tell's public confirmation meant that the work of correcting it was now urgent in a way that its private existence had not demanded. Whatever discomfort the public nature of the revelation produced, and the discomfort was real, because no professional pitcher enjoys having his mechanical vulnerabilities confirmed in a post-game press conference, it was secondary to the work. He is young enough in his major league career that mechanical adjustments of this kind are still relatively accessible. The habits are not yet calcified into something that resists correction. The coaches who worked with him through the film session found the tell, named it precisely, and built the adjustment that addresses it. Whether the adjustment holds under game conditions, under the specific pressure of competition, where mechanical habits assert themselves most powerfully precisely because the conscious attention that training deploys cannot be maintained simultaneously with the competitive focus that pitching demands, is the question the next start will answer. Because the catcher-pitcher relationship in professional baseball is one of the sport's most sensitive and consequential partnerships. Its foundation is trust, the mutual confidence between a catcher who is directing the game from behind the plate and a pitcher who is executing the direction from the mound. That trust requires, among other things, the belief that the catcher is seeing everything that needs to be seen. That nothing significant is escaping his attention. That the pitcher can focus entirely on execution because the monitoring and the management are being handled by the man giving the signs. Smith's confirmation that Ohtani had seen the tell before he did introduced a complication into that foundation. Not a catastrophic one, Smith's honesty about the timeline was itself a demonstration of the kind of character that good battery relationships are built on. But a complication nonetheless. Sasaki now knew that his catcher had not been the first to identify his vulnerability. That the identification had come from the dugout, from a player watching the game from a distance, rather than from the professional monitoring of the person closest to his mechanics throughout every pitch of the game. How Sasaki processes this, whether it introduces doubt into his relationship with Smith or produces the kind of honest recalibration that actually strengthens a battery partnership by forcing both parties to examine their communication and attention more carefully, is something that will play out across the remainder of the season in ways that are not visible from the outside. But the question is there now. Smith put it there with his honesty. And honesty, however valuable in the long run, always creates complications in the short one. The question arrived in his post-game availability with the inevitability of a pitch you see coming from the moment it leaves the hand. He had known, from the moment Smith sat down in front of the reporters, that the conversation would eventually reach him. That Smith's words, the specific 5 words that had identified him as the first to see what the catcher had missed, would generate a question that required a response. He answered it the way he answers questions that touch on sensitive organizational dynamics, with enough honesty to confirm that the substance of what was said is real, and enough restraint to prevent his response from adding to the complications that the substance has already created. He confirmed that he had noticed something during the game. He confirmed that he had communicated what he noticed through the appropriate internal channels, not shouted from the dugout, not flagged in a way that would have disrupted the game's flow or drawn the opposing team's attention to the fact that a tell had been identified. Through the quiet, proper mechanisms that a professional organization uses to share information between players without broadcasting it to everyone in the stadium. He confirmed that the communication happened. He confirmed that it reached the right people. And he declined to elaborate on the timeline or the specifics in ways that would extend the public conversation about Smith's role in the situation or Sasaki's mechanical vulnerability beyond what had already been confirmed. Then he said something that the reporters in the room did not expect and that became the second wave of the story's media travel. He said this was not the first time. 6 words. Following 5 words. 11 words total that the U.S. baseball media spent the next 24 hours unpacking with the focused energy that significant revelations generate when they arrive in sequence, and each one implies something larger than what has been explicitly stated. If this was not the first time Ohtani had noticed something about Sasaki's mechanics before the battery identified it, if the tell that Smith confirmed in his post-game comments was a recurring pattern rather than a situational anomaly, then the implications extend beyond one loss and one press conference and one catcher's honest admission. They extend to every start Sasaki has made this season. To every game where the tell may have been present and visible and exploitable by opposing hitters who are paid to find exactly this kind of information. To the question of whether the losses that have punctuated the Dodgers season contain a thread that runs through Sasaki's starts, a mechanical pattern that has been contributing to outcomes in ways that the team's internal analysis had not fully identified. The media followed this thread with the thoroughness that significant stories demand. Film was reviewed. Pitch-by-pitch sequences from Sasaki's starts were examined with the specific attention of analysts looking for the mechanical pattern that Ohtani had noticed and Smith had eventually confirmed. Hitters who had faced Sasaki were contacted, informally, through the networks of relationships that baseball journalism runs on, and asked whether they had identified anything unusual in his delivery. The answers that came back were not definitive. They were not the clean confirmation that would have transformed the story from a significant revelation into something more damaging. But they were not the clear denials that would have contained it either. They were ambiguous in the specific way that ambiguous answers are often more revealing than definitive ones. He praised Smith's honesty. He framed Ohtani's observation as evidence of the kind of team-wide investment in each other's success that championship organizations require. He addressed the mechanical adjustment that the pitching staff was working on with Sasaki with enough specificity to demonstrate that the organization was taking the issue seriously and enough vagueness to protect the corrective process from the scrutiny of opponents who would use every publicly available detail to prepare their hitters. He did not address the timeline. He did not engage with the implication of Smith's 5 words, the specific suggestion that the catcher had been behind the pitcher's most observant teammate in identifying a vulnerability that falls squarely within the catcher's professional domain. He moved the conversation forward. Toward the next game. Toward the adjustments being made. Toward the collective focus that a roster processing a loss needs to maintain if it is going to compete at the level its talent demands. This is what managers do. They manage. They contain. They redirect. But the story was already out. Will Smith had told the truth in a post-game press conference, and the truth had traveled in the way that truths always travel when they are honest and specific and touch on the most interesting player in the sport in a way that reveals something about him that numbers and highlights do not capture. Not the tell. Not Smith's admission. Not the media response or Robert's careful management or the film sessions that followed. All of these things are consequential in their immediate context and will fade as the season moves forward and new stories replace them. What will last is the image of a player watching his teammate pitch from the dugout, watching with the kind of informed, technically precise attention that comes from being both a pitcher and a student of the game at the deepest possible level, and seeing something that the specialized professional monitoring of the battery missed. Not because Smith is inadequate. Will Smith is an excellent major league catcher. He has proven this across years of professional competition at the highest level. But because Ohtani sees baseball differently from everyone else on the field. He sees it from both sides simultaneously, from the pitcher's perspective and the hitter's perspective, with an understanding of both that is not theoretical but experiential. He has thrown every pitch. He has faced every approach. He knows what a tell looks like because he knows what tipping feels like from the mound. That dual understanding is not just what makes him extraordinary as a two-way player. It makes him, as Smith quietly confirmed in 5 honest words after a difficult loss, something more than any individual performance can capture. It makes him the most intelligent player in the room. In every room he enters.